Hey, it's recording.
Okay.
So,
What?
so I never got your father's name.
Okay, it's James, James.
Mm-hmm.
And then Hixon, it's like Nixon, but with an H in front of it, Hixon.
Okay. Okay. Hey, Mr. James, I thank you for your service in World War II.
She said, thank you for your service.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, so
Can you hear him okay?
yeah, it's just glitching a little bit.
Okay.
So, is it okay if you could tell me your life before you entered World War II?
So talk about where you were born and like the year and um
Well, I was born in a little town which is a subsidiary of Birmingham, Alabama. It's called Wylam, Wilam. We lived in a house with my grandmother and grandfather on one side. My dad and mother lived on the other. I was born there on May the 27th, 1928. And I lived there for quite a while. And my other grandmother and grandfather lived not far from us. Of course, we were pretty close together. But then we moved to a town next to this one called Fairfield, Alabama. And that's where I went to school and finished up in school. And spent most of my time there.
talk a little bit about the Depression and some things that you had to do during the Depression.
And I remember when we lived next to the railroad track, the Depression, we were pretty poor, but my grandfather had a farm behind his house. That's how we could survive with the vegetables and things, growing them up on our own farm. And then he had a cow, so it would milk the cow, and we could make butter and so forth. And I remember sometimes when the train would come from the coal mines, and the engineer and the fireman on the train would shovel coal out on the ground, so we would have some coal to take to put into our stoves in the wintertime. But we managed to survive because we could do it and could be self-sufficient among ourselves, but we didn't have a lot of money and things to spend for things that like nowadays. But we managed to make it pretty well, and I grew up with a loving family.
And then talk about in high school, you played football.
Now, after we moved from Wylam to Fairfield, my father worked in the steel mills. And I went to the high school there, and some of my friends went out for football when I was a freshman. And they talked me into going out to play in football, and at first I didn't know whether I was going to be on the team. I just sat on the bench. But when I started playing, I played for almost 2 years and was all county 2 years in a row. So I became pretty proficient in the football deal. But that was what.
And talk about like what it was like when you started hearing about like the war breaking out in Europe, and how was it affecting like your family or your friends and things like that?
Well, most of my friends that were a little bit older than me in high school had gone into the service and to the Army and Navy and so forth, the Marines. And one of my cousins was in the Marine Corps. And then, but I didn't had not planned to go in at that time because I was only wasn't quite 16 years old. But it was pretty bad, and most of my friends, like I say, that was a little bit older than me in high school, had already gone into the service. Now, I had not really planned to go in until later on when I decided I was going to go in was because of a teacher I had got into some confrontation, and it caused a little bit of I had to move and went to another school. So when I got to where I was not going to be able to play football, I finally, with all my friends going into the service, I decided that I would go in. And I got my dad to sign the papers for me to go into the Navy. And he did, and I went into the Navy. And they sent me to San Diego, California.
And you were 17.
And I hadn't turned 17. I was actually 16. And I got to
Wow.
the Naval Academy in San Diego, California. And that's when I got turned to 17. And they were training me to be a motor machinist mate. And I was qualified for submarine duty and other duty. But I went to school to study how to work on diesel engines. We finished going to the getting into the training. They sent me to San Francisco, California, and put me on this wooden ship, which is a minesweeper. And the war was still going on. Had been making negotiations with the Japanese, but the war was still going. And as we got on there, they sent, I think there was about 3 other of these ships, but our ship, the 420, which you will have a chance to pull up on the
Yeah,
Is that
so
the
this
ship?
is a photo of, yeah, this is the ship that he was on. But I'm gonna email you some photos of it, and then I'll email you a link where you can actually read a little bit more about it. So
Okay.
I'll email that to you. Okay.
Okay.
yeah, that ship. There was I think we had 3 or 4 others that went with us, but that ship there, the one I was on, we were the lead ship because our captain had come up through the ranks, and he was a lieutenant in the Navy. Spent a lot of time in there, and we were the first to go into any area. But when we left San Francisco, as I said, the war was still going on, and we went to an island called Guam. We went to Pearl Harbor first and got supplies and things there. And when we left Pearl Harbor, we went to Guam, and that was going to be our home port type thing.
But can I ask a question first? When you went to Pearl Harbor, had they bombed Pearl Harbor yet, or was that after you went?
No, they had bombed. Pearl Harbor was bombed up so bad and tore up so bad that we had to move to way off behind the main area of Pearl Harbor. That there were so many ships sunk around us that we had to pull in the back into some back waters behind the main part of the island cities, because it was the only place that we could tie up and then get supplies. But most of the ships, we had to go around a lot of them that were bombed out and tore up. And when we got to Guam, as I said, that was our lead home port. And we went out of Guam, And MacArthur and those that sent us back into islands that they had hop skipped because there was a lot of Japanese still on them. And we had to go back into those areas to the Mariana Islands, Marshall Islands, and sweep around those islands so the Marines could go back on to those islands to make sure that there was no bombs or mines around them. And they would go back on those islands and pull the Japanese off. Yes. What was you gonna say?
No, I just said wow to what you just said.
Okay. So you want to, okay, do you have any other questions that you want, I mean, do you want to talk about he did meet a Japanese, I think what was his position? Because you were given some time to go into a city when you were there. Okay, well, if you, I mean, I know.
Yeah, what she's saying, we spent a lot of time around the islands and Saipan and different islands. And when I was assigned to the ship, I was a motor machinist mate, and I was in the engine room. And it was my duty to make sure that the ship was going at the right speed. To put all of that sweep gear out that we called, we had this stuff that would put some cables out, and on those cables would be sharp bladed things a little bigger than your hand. It would slide down the wire that supported the mine and would cut it, and the mine would float to the top of the water. And we'd radio one ship that was standing to come and shoot it, and it exploded. And there were times when we went through some of the islands that I would be in the engine room, and my friend that would be up in the pilot house, he would radio down to me and call me and tell me to come up on deck because there would be a couple of mines that were cut and we could not dodge them. We had to go right in between them and hope we didn't hit them. And I would come out on the deck to make sure that if they would hit them, that I'd have a chance to get off the ship. And then the other times we would sweep mines we called acoustic mines. And we'd put an electric cable back behind the ship and pull it. And the first time we went into those minefields, it went off right behind the ship, and it shook all of the deck plates and tools in the engine room. And I started out the engine. I had the engine room to climb up the ladder to get out. I had done, it wouldn't have known it had blown us up anyway. So I went back and sat down and did my job on the ship. But now we spent, as we were going in most of the islands, they had signed a treaty. But we still had to go to, like I say, to the islands that the Marines had gone around and left the Japanese on, and there'd be several hundred Japanese soldiers still on those islands. Now, they didn't make any real threats to us because we didn't have to go ashore on those islands. We could stay on our ship. But now what Perry was saying is we went to Japan and we swept for mines in the Bay of Tokyo. And we spent a lot of time there in Yokosuka, Japan. Now, while we were there, we left to go to Japan. We had hit the tail end of a typhoon, and our ship had a cooling tube for the shaft of the drive shaft, and we got about 3 foot of water in the back end, the aft end of our ship. So when we got into port, I had to clean our engines and work on our engines and clean up all of that stuff. Well, the Japanese then we had taken over the island, and the war was basically over. But we brought some Japanese laborers to help me clean the engines and some Japanese machinists. But there was one Japanese man there, was the interpreter. His name was Ichiro Suzuki. And I would give him cigarettes and sugar and stuff. And he would ask me to come and visit with his family. Well, I wasn't too sure I wanted to do that. But one day when I had liberty, I went out the gate. He was standing there waiting for me. Now, he was a very nice guy. And he asked me to come to visit his family. He told me he was a captain in the Japanese Imperial Army. But the only thing he told me was that he was in the China, Burma, India campaign, which was different from the Pacific. Well, I went to visit his home, and there was three beautiful Japanese homes up on this hill. When I went in, they treated me like royalty, and I'm just a motor machinist mate in the U.S. Navy. He was a captain in the Army, but his mother was very kind and generous, and I visited with him for several weeks as we stayed there. And it just so happened one afternoon we were sitting there, and this big Japanese man walked in that I had not seen, and it was his father. And when he came in and sat down, found out his father was an admiral in the Japanese Imperial Navy. While we were sitting there, they were talking back and forth in Japanese. All you've been, and I mentioned several islands. And when I said Truck Islands, I saw his father kind of stand up, so to speak, and I knew it hit a nerve. When we went to Truck Island to sweep mines there, we cut 36 mines out of one of the areas. Truman had sent our fleet a letter of hazardous duty well done. Well, I knew that we had hit a nerve with this Japanese father, because there was a bunch of Japanese warships that looked like Pearl Harbor to Japan. We had blown up and tore up there. So his father had to be there. But he turned and says, "We do not worry, there's no problem." And said, we all were honorable men serving our country and had to do what was necessary. We had to serve with honor. That was it. Now, make all of this story up, that after I left there, we went on to another island, but it was time for me to come home. Well, I came on out of the Navy, and I was at home, and at one time, back then, there was a magazine that was called True Magazine. In the back of this True Magazine was always a true story. And there was a story of a man that was in the U.S. Marine Corps that had got captured with the Japanese and was in a Japanese prison camp in the China, Burma, India area. He was talking about how bad they had been treated, mistreated, didn't have much food, until one day they pulled them all out into the field, outside of the building and told him, says, this captain is leaving and this captain is taking over. You will report to him. This fellow said, when the other captain that had been so bad left, the new captain took over. Said he treated us with quite respect, gave us clothes, gave us good food, and said his name was Captain Ichiro Suzuki. And it had to be the man that I had been visiting with, because his mother had given me a silk scarf with my name in Japanese on one side and American on the other side. But Ichiro and I had become somewhat of friends. But like I say, he never told me what he did. He just said he was in that part of the war. So that was part of my story of my life in that area.
Wow.
I haven't ever been able to, to be able to find out how to get back in touch with them. But I know that by being with him, I realized the man that I was with, the way he treated me with respect and everything, it had to be him. But like I say, he never told me that he was there in that area, other than just being in the China-Burma India campaign area.
Wow. What was his name again?
Pardon?
His name.
His name? It's called, his first name was Ichiro. Now, ever how you spell it is beyond me. And his last name was Suzuki. Ichiro Suzuki, Captain Ichiro Suzuki. And his father, like I say, was an admiral in the Japanese Imperial Navy. So there I'm just a regular motor machinist mate in the U.S. Navy, but they treated me with respect.
Wow.
Now, that when you take that thing that Perry has sent you, because you can sit right, go on to your computer on USS YMS 420 minesweeper, and it will pull up several of them, and you will be able to see that ship plus others, and it will give you a description of it. Now, it will say on there that it had a complement of, say, 30 men or more, but we didn't have that many on because it was still wartime. And we had, I think there was about 18 or 20 of us actually on there. As I said, I was assigned to the engine room on that ship. So if there's anything else I can tell you, just let me know.
During the war, were you ever in combat?
No, we actually, what we did once we got there, most of the combat, real combat had been, was over with. And what we were doing, as I said, there's some of these islands that the Marines had went around during combat, and there was Japanese, some of them had anywhere from 100 to 200 Japanese soldiers on them. And we went back to those islands and swept for mines so that the Marines could go back in with their landing force and get those Japanese off that were still on there. Now, there's a couple of times that we went into some areas that we were, as I said, our ship went in first. So we went in, and when you sweep for those mines, you have the equipment that goes out in back, and a big thing that looks like a torpedo that floats with a flag on it. And then it comes out of the back part of this area here, and there's a cables comes out.
Wait, can you move it up? Okay, I see it.
Yeah, the cables would come through the back part of it.
Wow.
And then we pull those cables out on the back side. But when we got them back there on that float with the flag on it, as we pulled them, when we got them off of the deck, we had another thing that looked like a half-closed Venetian blind, a big steel thing, that we would tie on with this cable at a certain length, hopefully, with the captured letters and things that we had, the maps, that we would say that these mines were at a certain depth. And we would hope that that's where they were. But we would set cables that would bring these cables that we pull behind us, it would pull them down to a certain depth. And they had a thing on it was bigger than your hand. It was a real sharp blade that was attached to those cables. And it would catch the cable that was supporting the mine as it floated. And when it would catch that cable, it would cut it. Then the mine would come popping to the top of the water, and then someone else would come by and shoot it and blow it up. So there was areas that we went into that we just hoped and prayed that we were going at the right depth to be in there without hitting them ourselves. And we were pretty lucky that we did not really encounter them other than cut them. And then they would come up around our ship or behind our ship. And we didn't have to get into any what we would per se call combat duty. It was just the duty of going in and getting it cleaned up for the Marines to move in.
Were you injured?
No, I didn't have any injuries that I needed to have any problems with that.
Did you have any friends that were lost in the war?
No, I didn't. Well, my cousin, he wasn't lost in it, but he was a machine gunner for the Marines. He was in earlier than me because he was on WWII, and I think he got injured. But now there was two of my friends that was brought on to our ship. They were on a destroyer that had gotten just before we got to where they were, about, I guess, maybe some 5 or 6 months before we moved in. Their ship had gotten torpedoed and blown up and had been taken back to Pearl Harbor and put into dry dock. So they took, one of them was a cook, thank goodness, and so we had somebody to give us some pretty good food. And the other fellow that was a friend of mine from Colorado, he was up on the flying bridge. But those two guys had lost their ship with a torpedo, Japanese torpedo, and they had moved them over onto our ship. But we had one ship that got damaged, but they did it themselves. They were assigned to shoot the mines, like I was saying. Once we cut them, someone had to be laying, the ship had to be sitting two out there to be called in to come in to shoot it, but you need to stay back far enough that it wouldn't damage your ship. And one of these ships had a little guy on we called a 90-day wonder as a captain. He went in too close, and our captain and everyone was trying to radio him and tell him to back off. And he shot it, and it blew the part of his ship off and injured some of his men. But our ship never had that problem because our captain knew more about what to do than that. And so I was pretty lucky that we didn't have any real damage to our ship.
Wow. What's one thing from the war that you will never forget?
Say again?
What's one thing from the war that you would never forget?
Well, I guess just like I say, the area of going around into those places that we had to go to, and the one that, like I say, that was the most memorable was the one at Truck Islands, where I saw all of these ships that were sunk, the Japanese ships. So it's just a matter of thinking about most of those places, because like I say, at the time, being, 18 years old, I didn't really think about all of the danger we were in. But now I sit back and think, if we had had those charts that we had, and then where the mine depth was we didn't have it figured out right, we could have hit a mine at any time. So that's basically what I think about is what could have been. But thank goodness the good Lord was looking out for us, and our ship, we didn't have any problems there.
Wow. Did you celebrate the end of the war?
Not any more than most any people. I came home, and my mother and dad met me at the airport, and I was glad to get home.
Well, when the war officially ended, weren't you on a ship though, headed to Japan?
Yeah, when they
Signed the treaty, where were you when they signed the official treaty? Were you on the ship already?
yeah, when they signed the treaty, we were leaving Guam, and I think we were really at Saipan, which was
Are you okay?
another area just north of Guam, and we had gone into Saipan to get some supplies to head to Japan. But while we were at Saipan, the island of Saipan, they signed a peace treaty, and the war was officially over, which we celebrated there then. And
how did you celebrate when you were there? I mean, what kind of...
Well, we went ashore and drank a bunch of beer for one thing. But anyway, we got to Saipan, and they told us the war was over, and we were pretty happy about that. And I looked, and as we stood there, a bunch of Marines came out with full gear and all that. I said, "What's going on?" They said, "Well, there was about 150 Japanese and you on the far end of the island, and they were going after them. And I think a lot of them were jumping off the island and trying to get away from the Marines." But we were at Saipan when they officially signed it. And then we left there and went into Japan, into Yokosuka, Japan.
Wait, can I ask something? When you said Japanese citizens were jumping off the cliffs deep on Saipan, did you mean about Saipan's suicide cliff?
She's asking if the Japanese were running from the Marines in Saipan, were they jumping off the
Yes.
cliff to commit suicide?
Yes, it was, what it was an area way back on the back of Saipan where the Japanese had a bunch of army men were still there, but it was an area where they had set their camps up, and they had, I think, some civilians in there, they said, that would take care of the quarters and all that for the Japanese army. And they were still hiding out back in, there was jungles back in there. And when the Marines started going back in there after them, they told me, one of the Marines said that one area that these Japanese would run from them and were trying to jump off the other end of the island. They didn't realize that they were coming to let them know that the peace treaty was signed and they were there to help them. But they thought that they thought the war was still going on and trying to run from it.
Wow. When were you discharged?
When were you discharged?
Oh. It was in the mid-60s when I came out, I think.
No, it wasn't in the 60s, Dad. She's talking about the when you first came back from the war. You came back into, where did you go when you came back? Were you in San Francisco when you came back?
They brought me back into San Diego. When I came back to the United States to get discharged, they brought me back to Seattle, Washington. And I was discharged in Seattle, Washington, and then flew from there back to Birmingham.
But that was probably about what year? 46,
Yeah,
1946?
about 40, I think it was 46, 40, somewhere along in there, mid
46 or-
40s.
46 or 47, somewhere around there.
He was discharged in 1946.
It was sometime around 1946. Yeah.
Okay. Did you have any long or short-term injuries?
No,
Were there any medals or awards that you received?
any medals?
And, yeah.
They gave us on our ship, they gave us a victory medals. And as I said, I think it was Truman had sent us a letter, like I say, of a hazardous duty well done. And I think that was things like that.
Yeah, and I've seen that letter. I just don't know where that letter is right now, but it was from President Harry Truman.
Wow.
Congratulating their ship, for a job well done in the
It's
Pacific.
amazing. What was your life like after World War II ended?
Okay, so she wants to know what you did after the war.
Oh.
You went back to high school. I think you went back to high school.
Yeah, I finished I had two credits to finish high school. And then I went to the University of Alabama in Birmingham. And I was working, and I would go to school there at night and was studying. And while I was working at different jobs, I managed to go to work. At that time, the main occupation I did was with a company called Rust, R-U-S-T, Rust Engineering. And they were one of the country's largest engineering and construction companies. I went to work as a project engineer and a manager of construction managers, and worked for them for quite a while.
Was the transition from being out of the military difficult?
Not really. No, it was pretty easy to do.
Were there any ceremonies you went to honoring World War II veterans like yourself?
Okay, repeat that question.
Were there any ceremonies he went to honoring him and other World War II veterans?
This is when you talk about you went to the honor flight.
Yeah, they had a flight out of here, and I think it was in several different cities, called the World War II honor flight. Mm-hmm. And I went on that, which took us up to Washington and so forth, which was a World War II honor flight. And that's where that hat I had on, they gave us those hats and things.
And that was what they gave them when they went on the honor flight. They came and got him and took him to Washington. And then you were the Grand Marshal. Tell her about being the Grand Marshal.
here at, on, Veterans Day, they have a parade here in Northport. And they elected me as the honor, marshal, the grand marshal for the parade of that day.
That's
That was,
amazing.
yeah, that was this past Veterans Day parade
Wow.
in Northport, Alabama.
Wow. Would you go back to where you fought?
Would I go back?
Would you
To
go
where you
back
fought?
That's
To
fine.
visit.
Yeah,
visit.
if I had a chance, I would go back, and some days, sometimes I think I'd like to go back over there and see if I could go back and find that Jap that I was talking about, Ichiro.
But he was the same age of you, right?
No,
Was
he
he older?
was older than me. I'd
Oh,
say
he's
he
older.
was probably in his late 20s or early. Yeah, I'd say at least 25, 28 years old, 25 years old.
So he
Wow.
was at least 10 years older.
Yeah, he was older. He was a little older than me.
But you did go back to Pearl Harbor. Didn't you go back to Pearl
Yeah.
Harbor?
Yeah,
What year was that? Do you remember? Was it in the 80s or 90s?
it was in the 80s. We went back to Pearl
Or maybe it
Harbor.
was in the 90s.
90s, yeah. 'Cause mother and I went to there for a football game. And we went back, her mother and I went back to Pearl Harbor. And I went back into the area where a lot of the ships are still there that were memorials. And as I walked on a couple of them, I had to turn and get back off. I couldn't continue to walk on them. I thought about some of the people were not as fortunate as me. And but I did go back into Pearl Harbor. Her mother and I went there to a vacation and a football game.
Yeah, but it was an emotional experience, is what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah.
I see. That was all my questions.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna send you this, a closer picture of this. This is him in his uniform on the ship.
Wow.
So I'm gonna, I took a picture of that, and I took a couple of pictures of Dad this morning, and I'll just I'll email those to you. Okay.
Okay. So, Mr. James, you said your birthday was on May 27th.
Yeah, May the 27th.
Well, my
I'll
grandpa's
be-
birthday is on May 30th.
Okay.
Yeah, he was born May 30th, 1928.
Your grandfather was born May 30th, 1928.
Mhm.
So your grandfather's gonna be 95 too, or 97.
Yeah.
Your grandfather would be 97?
No, if he was still here, he'd be turning 95 this year.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
He's turning 95 in May, my
Wow.
dad.
Well, this is my grandfather in the service.
Oh, wow.
Wow. How about that?
Was he in the army?
Yes, he was an army medic / private stationed in Japan during the post-war era.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I mean, he didn't really tell me much about his service. I later found out he was a private after months after, yeah, a few years after he passed away. But I may have gotten an idea of what he might have done during his service.
Okay.
Wait, is
Oh,
it okay if I
I
can
hope
tell
it-
you?
Yeah, go ahead and tell us.
So this past summer, I learned that after Japan surrendered, there was a 6-year occupation of the island, and American medics were treating those who survived the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, given that information, the fact that my grandfather was a medic, he might have been among those medics treating the survivors,
Oh, okay.
which would probably give me an understanding why he didn't tell me much about his service.
Yeah. Right. How long have you been a Girl Scout? Did you start out as a brownie?
So I started out as a daisy. This is I think my 12th or 13th year here as a Girl Scout. This is actually my final year of being one.
So you're a senior. Are you a senior in high school?
Yes, I'm a senior.
Do you know where you're going to go to college? Have you made plans?
Not yet. I'm still waiting here from what last college I applied to. I applied to sorry. I applied to 9 colleges. I got into 7. I got rejected by 1, but that's okay. I'm waiting to hear back from 1 more. Then I'll make a decision.
Oh, okay, good. Do you know what you want to major in?
History.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, you've got a great troop leader in Lindsay Mulholland. I'm looking forward to meeting her. We're both in the DAR. And so, we're excited. I'm going to see her probably at Continental Congress in June.
Oh, you are?
I used to be a Girl Scout troop leader too, but it was years and years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. So Mr. James, thank you for your service in World War II. Miss Perry, it was very lovely to meet you.
Well, I hope I gave you enough information to help you. I don't
You
usually
did.
talk about it too much.
So will you send us like your final project, a link to your final project to watch it? Is it going to be a full video, like a movie documentary?
Basically, this is for, like I said, this was for my Girl Scout Gold Award. I already got the award. I created a website where all my documentaries are, where all my interviews are at, and I have a YouTube channel to expand to expand it so people can watch them. My video interviews are on my YouTube.
Awesome. Okay.
Yes,
All right. Well, send me the link for that and I'll look at that.
I will.
Yeah, just email me the link.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, you have a great day. It was nice to meet you.
It was nice to meet you both.
Okay, thank you. I hope it did you a good job.
You did. Okay. Bye.
All right.
All right, she's
Thank you.
deleting. Bye.
Okay. Bye.